My father gave my Fisher Island penthouse to my sister's husband, and still had the nerve to say it was completely legal. When I heard that, I just froze. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misunderstood. But no. My own family had just cut me out of property I helped build, and they truly believed I wouldn't notice. The proof was right there. 9:14 in the morning. An email from the county recorder confirming the transfer of ownership. Penthouse. Equity tied to the property. New owner, Julian Vane. My name is Hannah Bradford. I'm 34. I've spent more than half my life inside my family's companies. That's where I learned early on that silence usually reveals more than arguments ever do. While most people my age were busy trying to prove their worth, I preferred to watch. Numbers, decisions, people, especially people. My father, John Bradford, has always believed control is the only way to maintain respect. For years, I was his right hand in the family business on Fisher Island, reviewing contracts, organizing assets, fixing problems nobody else wanted to deal with. My sister Chloe, 1 year younger than me, lived in a completely different world. Events, trips, perfect photos on Instagram. She had a curious talent, looking important without being responsible for anything. That's the environment Julian walked into. Julian Vane, her new husband. He's the kind of guy who walks into a room already convinced he understands everyone in it. And that he's always 3 steps ahead. His last name carries weight. Well regarded in certain circles. But anyone who actually knows the numbers understands that reputation doesn't always come with real money. When they got married a few months ago, I started paying closer attention. My instincts were already telling me something about the situation didn't add up. I just didn't have the missing piece yet. That piece arrived that morning. "Congratulations on the ownership transfer," the clerk from the county office said on the phone, in a tone that sounded far too casual for the kind of information she had just delivered. "Transfer?" I asked. "Yes, the penthouse and the equity connected to the property were transferred to Mr. Julian Vane." For a moment, it didn't even make sense. "Interesting," I said. "Everything was completed with signed documentation," she added. "Signed documentation? I know every contract that goes through that family. I've been reviewing them for more than 10 years. And I knew one thing for certain. I had never signed anything like that." A few hours later, I ran into Julian in the lobby of the main building on the island. Fisher Island looked exactly the way it always does. Quiet, calm. The kind of place where multi-million-dollar decisions happen in conversations that sound almost casual. Julian was leaning near the elevators, scrolling through his phone like he had absolutely nothing to hide. "Don't take it personally," he said with that mocking tone. "It was all legal." "Legal?" I repeated. He gave that shameless smile. "Absolutely." I acted naturally, not because I was calm, but because at that moment something had already become very clear in my mind. If someone had forged my signature, they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Most injustices don't start with shouting. They start with a document someone believes you'll never read. If you've ever seen someone try to erase your place like you were never there, then you know exactly how a story like this begins. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Now tell me something. Would you stay quiet? Or would you make sure everyone knew who actually made the mistake? Later that afternoon, I went to see my father. His office sits on the top floor of one of our buildings overlooking the marina. Same view he's had for almost 20 years. Boats moving slowly through the water. Glass walls. Everything quiet and controlled. Exactly the way he likes it. John Bradford was behind his desk when I walked in, reading something on his tablet like nothing unusual had happened that day. He didn't look surprised to see me, which told me something right away. He already knew. "You got the email?" he said without looking up. Not a question, just a statement. "Yes," I said. He finally lifted his eyes from the screen. No apology, no hesitation. Just the calm expression of a man who believed the situation had already been settled. "You should have been informed earlier," he said, setting the tablet down. "But the paperwork moved faster than expected." Paperwork. That word sat there. I walked to the window behind the chairs and looked out at the water. "Did you sign it?" I asked. He didn't pretend not to understand what I meant. "Yes." Direct, cold, almost efficient. "The assets were reassigned," he continued. "It was the cleanest way to restructure things." Restructure. That was the language he used when people became numbers. I turned back toward him. "You transferred my property," I said, "and my shares." He leaned back in his chair like we were discussing something routine. "It's not personal, Hannah." Then he gave the explanation he probably thought would settle everything. "It's business. You of all people should understand that." Business. For most of my life, that word had meant strategy, protection, responsibility. But standing there in that office, it suddenly meant something else. It meant he had already decided I was expendable. I studied his face for a moment, trying to see if there was even a trace of doubt in him. There wasn't. And that's when something inside me became very clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a decision, and he believed it was final. "All right," I said. That was all. No argument, no raised voice. He seemed almost relieved, like the situation had resolved itself exactly the way he expected. But as I walked out of his office, another thought settled in my mind. Something simple. You can argue opinions, you can debate intentions, but facts don't negotiate. And if someone had really filed documents with my forged signature, then sooner or later the truth was going to reach a courtroom. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the lobby button. For the first time that day, I wasn't thinking about my father, or my sister, or Julian. I was thinking about paperwork. Because in places like Fisher Island, people believe power comes from money. But that's not actually true. Power comes from the document that proves who really owns it. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and the first thing I did was pull out my phone. Not to call anyone. To read the document again. Transfer of ownership. Penthouse unit. Equity attached to the property. New holder, Julian Vane. Attached below it was the part that actually mattered. A signed consent. My consent. I stopped walking. For a moment, the quiet of Fisher Island felt almost absurd. Palm trees outside the glass entrance, golf carts passing slowly in the distance. A place designed so problems never look like problems. But the signature on that document was supposed to be mine. And it wasn't. I zoomed in on the attachment. Every letter. Every stroke. Whoever did it had tried to copy the way I sign contracts. The angle, the pressure, even the slight curve at the end of my last name. Close. But not close enough. I've signed thousands of documents over the years. Contracts, asset transfers, property agreements. When you do that long enough, you recognize your own handwriting the way people recognize their own voice. This one wasn't mine, not even close, which meant something very simple. Someone had submitted a legal document with a forged signature. I walked outside and sat on the stone bench facing the marina. The water was moving slowly between the docks. Everything looked normal. But my mind was already putting pieces together. My father signed the transfer. Julian received the property. And the system accepted the document, which meant the forgery didn't happen by accident. Someone prepared it. Someone filed it. And someone believed I would never look closely enough to question it. I opened the document one more time. The timestamp. The filing office. The digital registry number. Details most people ignore. Details I've spent years reviewing. And suddenly, something else caught my attention. The date. 2 days before Chloe's wedding. I leaned back slightly and I thought about it. So the plan had already been in motion before the ceremony even happened. Before the champagne. Before the congratulations. Before the speeches about family and loyalty. They had already moved the property. Already prepared the paperwork. Already signed my name. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my bag. At that moment, something became very clear to me. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was strategy. And strategies can be dismantled, piece by piece. Because there is one thing people like Julian always forget. They assume arrogance is the same thing as intelligence. It isn't. Arrogance just makes people careless. And careless people leave trails. Legal ones. I didn't go home that evening. Instead, I drove straight to the office. Our headquarters sit right by the marina, a glass building my father likes to call efficient. The kind of place where money moves quietly. Most of the lights were already off when I walked in. Only the legal floor was still lit. That wasn't unusual. Contracts don't really follow office hours. Carla Jennings was still at her desk when I stepped into the hallway. She's been the senior legal coordinator in our company for 15 years, which means she's seen almost every document our family has ever signed. She looked up. "Hannah? I thought you were off today." "I need to check a filing," I said. "What kind?" I placed my phone on her desk and opened the document. "The Penthouse transfer registered this morning." She leaned closer to the screen. For a moment, her expression stayed neutral. Then her eyes stopped at the signature line. She frowned. "Did this go through compliance?" she asked. "That's what I'm trying to understand." Carla turned to her computer and typed for a few seconds. "This didn't come through our legal system," she said finally. That narrowed things quickly. Every asset transfer normally passes through legal review before reaching the registry. Skipping that step isn't impossible, but it's deliberate. "Who filed it?" I asked. She checked the registry record again. "External submission," meaning someone bypassed the company entirely. Carla looked back at the signature. "Hannah? Yes? That's not your handwriting." "I know." She lowered her voice. "This is forgery." "Yes. And if that document is already in the county registry, it becomes criminal." She looked at me carefully. "So, what do you want to do?" I picked up my phone. "Nothing." She blinked. "Nothing?" "For now. Because people like Julian always make the same mistake. They think the hardest part is getting away with it. It isn't. The hardest part is surviving the moment when the paperwork comes back. And paperwork always comes back." I left the office a little after 9 that night, but instead of driving home, I stayed in the car for a moment with the document open on my phone again. Once you stop looking at a situation emotionally, patterns start to show themselves. And something about the timing kept bothering me. The filing date, the transfer approval, the wedding. 2 days before Chloe married Julian. That wasn't coincidence. I opened our internal asset records and checked the timeline again. The property transfer had already been prepared before the ceremony even happened. Before the champagne, before the speeches, before anyone started pretending the marriage was about love. Which meant one thing. The wedding wasn't the beginning of the plan, it was part of it. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from my sister. A few seconds later, the screen lit again, and her voice message came through. "Dad said you stopped by his office today." I let the silence sit for a moment before replying. "Yes, I did." Another pause. Then her voice again, softer this time. "He's just trying to stabilize things, Hannah." Stabilize. That was the same word my father used whenever control needed a softer name. So I asked the only question that mattered. "Did you know about the transfer?" There was a long silence on the line. Long enough to say everything she wasn't saying. When she finally spoke again, her tone had changed. "It's already done." Already done. People say that when they believe something can't be undone. But legal documents have one inconvenient characteristic. They leave trails. And trails always lead somewhere. It's strange how some truths don't reveal themselves right away. They wait. Leave a like if you've ever felt that moment when the silence around you suddenly started making sense. I drove home slowly that night, but my mind wasn't on the road. It was on the timeline. The wedding, the transfer, the forged signature. Plans like that don't appear overnight. They're prepared, reviewed, adjusted. Which meant this had been moving long before anyone raised a glass at Chloe's reception, and suddenly something else started to bother me. Not Julian. My father. The elevator doors opened when I reached my floor, and the hallway was quiet. Fisher Island always feels calm at night, like nothing serious could ever happen there. But calm places are usually where the quiet decisions are made. I unlocked the door and walked inside, dropping my keys on the counter. The apartment was dark except for the marina lights outside reflecting across the windows. My phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't Chloe. It was my father. I let it ring once before answering. "Hannah," he said immediately, his voice controlled as always. "Your sister told me you called her." I asked her a question. "You're overthinking this situation," he replied. "The restructuring was necessary." Necessary. "That's one way to describe forging my signature," I said calmly. There was a brief silence on the line. Then he sighed. "You're being dramatic." I leaned back against the counter. "Am I?" "This is a business decision," he continued. "You know how these things work." I did. That was exactly the problem. "Then you also know something else," I said. "And what's that?" "Business decisions usually leave records." Another pause. This one was longer. "Hannah," he said finally, his tone tightening. "Let it go." For a moment I almost laughed. Let it go. That's what people say when they're hoping you won't look any closer. But the moment he said those words, something in my mind locked into place. Because suddenly the whole situation looked different. Julian wasn't the one running this. He was just the one benefiting from it. And if that was true, then the real mistake hadn't been made by my sister's husband. It had been made by my father. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I couldn't sleep, because once you see the pattern behind something, your brain doesn't stop working. Coffee in hand, I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter and pulled up the property registry again. The same document stared back at me. Same forged signature. Same transfer approval. But this time, I wasn't looking at the signature. I was looking at the witnesses. Every property filing requires two. Most people never check that part. I did. 2 names were listed at the bottom of the document. One of them I didn't recognize. The second one made me stop. Martin Keaton. For a moment I just stared at the screen. Martin wasn't some random clerk. He was one of my father's longtime legal contacts. The kind of attorney people call when they want paperwork processed quickly and quietly. Which meant something very simple. This wasn't Julian improvising. Someone with experience had helped structure it. I leaned back in the chair and let that sink in. The transfer, the forged signature, the external filing. None of that happens cleanly unless someone knows exactly how the system works. My phone buzzed on the counter. Another message from Chloe. I let it sit for a moment before opening it. "Dad says you're making this bigger than it needs to be." I read the message twice. Then I called her. She answered after the second ring. "Hannah," she said cautiously. "I told you yesterday." "Did you know?" I asked. A pause. "What?" "About the paperwork." Another silence. Longer this time. "Hannah, it's complicated." "No," I said calmly. "It really isn't." She exhaled slowly on the other end of the line. "You're acting like this was done to hurt you. Wasn't it? That's not what this is about." "Then explain it." She didn't. Instead, she said the one sentence that confirmed everything. "You're not even Dad's real daughter, Hannah. You know that." The words landed quietly, almost casually, but they explained more than she probably intended. I stood there for a moment, absorbing what she had just admitted without realizing it. "Thank you," I said finally. "For what?" "For answering my question." Then I ended the call, because suddenly the strategy behind everything looked a lot clearer, and strategies only work until someone understands them. I didn't call my father back after that. There was nothing left to discuss. Instead, I opened the registry file again and looked at the document the way I've reviewed contracts for years. Not emotionally, but structurally. Signatures, witnesses, dates, jurisdiction. The forged signature was the obvious problem, but the structure of the filing revealed something else. The document had been processed through a private legal submission channel. That's not illegal, but it's usually used when someone wants paperwork approved quickly without passing through the slower corporate review systems. In other words, someone wanted this done quietly. I zoomed in on the attorney registration number again. Martin Keaton. The name sat there like confirmation. Keaton had worked with my father for years. Asset restructures, trust filings, complicated transfers. He was the kind of attorney people hired when paperwork needed to move fast, and when they didn't want too many questions asked. Which meant Julian wasn't running this. He didn't have the experience, or the access. My phone buzzed on the counter. My father again. I answered this time. "Hannah," he said immediately, his tone controlled. "Your sister told me about your conversation." "I'm sure she did." "You're escalating something that doesn't need to escalate." I leaned against the counter. "Someone filed a property transfer with my forged signature." "You're assuming that." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm reading it." Silence. Then his voice lowered. "This situation has already been resolved." Resolved. I walked to the window and looked out over the marina. "Did you see the signature before you approved the transfer?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, which told me enough. "Hannah," he said finally, "you're making this personal." I almost smiled, because in legal disputes, everything eventually comes down to one thing: a document. And documents have a habit of telling the truth, once someone actually reads them. The call with my father ended without either of us saying goodbye. That alone said enough. I set the phone down and reopened the registry file, this time paying attention to something most people ignore: the processing trail. Every legal filing leaves one: time of submission, verification stamp, clerk validation, details that usually don't matter unless something went wrong. I zoomed in on the digital record and noticed the processing time: 7 minutes. That was unusually fast for a property transfer involving corporate equity, which meant the documentation had been prepared before it ever reached the registry. Someone had cleared the path. My phone vibrated again. This time it was Julian. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Hannah," he said casually, "I heard you've been reviewing the transfer." "I read documents before I signed them," I replied. A small laugh came through the line. "You're taking this harder than you need to." "Am I?" "It's just restructuring," he said. "Your father agreed it made sense." I walked slowly toward the window, watching the marina lights move across the water. "Did you see the signature?" I asked. There was a pause. "I trusted the paperwork," he said. That sentence told me everything. Julian hadn't checked anything. He assumed the system protected him. People like him usually do. "You're smart, Hannah," he continued. "You know fighting this would just create unnecessary problems." Interesting choice of words. Problems. Not mistakes, not fraud. Problems. "If the paperwork is as solid as you think," I said calmly, "then you won't mind when lawyers start reading it." Silence filled the line. Then his voice came back sharper. "That sounds like a threat." "No," I replied. "It's a process." Because in situations like this, the truth doesn't appear during arguments. It appears when documents are placed on a table and everyone in the room is forced to read them. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting. Not with my father, not with Julian, with a lawyer. Daniel Harper had handled corporate litigation in Miami for more than 20 years. The kind of attorney companies call when disputes move beyond private conversations and start approaching courtrooms. His office overlooked Biscayne Bay. Clean desk, organized shelves, the kind of place where problems are analyzed, not discussed emotionally. He finished reading the document and placed it carefully on the table. "That signature isn't yours," he said. "No." He studied the registry record again. "And you never authorized the transfer?" "I didn't even see the document until yesterday morning." Daniel nodded slowly. "That simplifies things." "Does it?" "Yes." He turned the paper slightly and pointed at the line where my name appeared. In Florida, he explained calmly, a forged signature on a property transfer invalidates the entire filing. It doesn't matter who benefited from it. Meaning Julian, meaning my father. The document itself was the problem. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Who submitted this? An attorney named Martin Keaton. That name made him pause. I know Keaton. I assumed you might. He folded his hands on the desk. This isn't a small mistake, Hannah. Submitting forged documentation to the county registry is fraud. I know. So the real question isn't whether you can challenge this, he continued. It's how, I said. Exactly. I thought about my father repeating the same word the night before. Business. You should understand that. For the first time since the email arrived, the situation felt clear. My father believed the decision had already been made. Julian believed the paperwork protected him. But legal reality works differently. Documents don't belong to the person who files them. They belong to the person who can prove them. And forged ones have a habit of falls when checked, which means something very simple. The story they believed was finished, had only just started. Sometimes the moment that changes everything isn't loud. It's quiet, a single document on a table that suddenly reveals the truth about the people around you. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel. And tell me, in your own words, the moment you realized someone close to you had already decided your place in their life. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with her. Quiet truths protect more hearts than loud apologies.